Oh my gosh, I have not done live streaming for way too long. I know we've been talking about it, Terry, and like back in 2020, I don't know if you remember that, we used to be out in the other room and,
Yeah.
and we'd go live every day at 10:10 for how many days did we do?
We did it for 100 days in a row, and then
We did. And then, I
life
don't know,
got busy.
life got busy. Or we just started having continued these conversations, but with the two of us rather than allowing other people to hop in. So today I'm going to trip over Terry's foot that's right below me. And we got a text from one of our clients, and it was radical candor. And we're like, oh, open that. What's she sharing with us today? And we had a coaching conversation with her earlier about how to like handle this difficult, maybe he's not a difficult client, but yeah, there was a circumstance where they weren't giving the information. We've all been there where someone's not doing their piece, so you can't do your piece, and it just kind of drags on. So Terry, today I want to talk about how you help or we help clients work through situations so they can move faster and get the results they're kind of looking for. So as your psychologist and mindset and high performance coach, what's your like, I know you have the conversation with a lot of people, but talk us through some tips about like how we can have those conversations work candidly with our friends, our clients.
Well, I think first off, you just ball up your fists, shake a little bit, and get in their face. That's
One
probably
option.
the best way to go. But in all seriousness, people beat around the bush way too much, and they talk about things in a way that we believe somebody else is going to catch the drift of the conversation. And what we're really doing is we're avoiding our own emotion in that, and we're avoiding the reality that, you know what, if I say this, it might activate my own emotions, or I might trigger you in some way and blow you up.
Yep.
And so as a result, I'm going to kind of skirt around the issue and say something like, this car prefers to use turn signals or something like that. This very first time I met Christine, it's a very disarming way to point something out, but at the same time, it's not, hey, I'm uncomfortable if you aren't using turn signals, please use turn signal. And that's more of a radical candor versus skirting an issue. Now, I have to say that when Christine did that years ago, it was endearing and it was funny. And I used the turn signal right after that. We were also on maybe our second date or something like that. And so I wanted to impress her by following directions. I don't do that so well anymore. But
14 years later.
but the reality of radical candor is a lot of times people aren't getting what they're looking for and aren't getting what they need because they're not asking for it. They're going around it, or they're assuming people are knowing what the meaning is, and they're leaving up to our own ego to interpret what's meant when we say something.
And so of course I'm listening to Terry and pulling it in, but I am also co-hosting or whatever this is. I'm part of the conversation, and I could just sit here and be like, yeah, okay, you're totally the expert and you are the expert, and I could just shut down and be like, oh, this is Terry's area. And I think that's a piece of like, how can I contribute? But that's not the main reason. That it's knowing, what do I want out of this, and I want to have a conversation and have people have an understanding of how they can be more full of candor.
Yeah, and so what I think you're talking about is the idea of shutting ourselves down when we actually have valuable information or valuable insight, valuable perspective or opinion about something, but instead of offering it, we shut ourselves down by saying we're irrelevant in some way.
Okay, irrelevant.
And so my information is irrelevant. And in fact, I've done that. There's a bunch of different consultants out there and a bunch of different high performance coaches. And when I think about like Simon Sinek or Brene Brown or Adam Grant or some of these big people, and I always can, compare myself to the biggest and go, well, what I'm saying might be irrelevant. what I'm really doing is I'm using their status or their position to reduce the size of my contribution. And as a result, I make myself feel powerless and worth less than those people.
So keep going.
And so when we're doing that, we want to look at the idea of radical candor is really first starting with the fact that you are a valuable person and you have something to say. Whether or not your head has told you that it's not valuable, you have to put it out there in the marketplace, or you have to put that out into the world for other people to be able to say this is relevant or this is not relevant. And you have to be vulnerable in that.
So no surprise, I change directions. I do that often. But let's go back to what's the first step of the radical candor? It's to know you have value.
To know you have value and to know you have something that you want to say.
So number 2 might be something you already mentioned is know what you want. Maybe backwards, but
yeah, you got to know what you want. You got to know what, and this is the idea of when we're talking about knowing what you want, you got to know what the goal of the conversation or goal of what the information you're putting out there is. And it might just be to open up the conversation more. It might be to take it in a different direction, like you just said. It might be because if you don't say it, you think you might forget it. It doesn't matter why you're doing it, but you got to have some kind of goal or have some kind of reason for it. Otherwise, it might just sound out of the blue. And you might even say, I just had a thought that's out of the blue, but then you're introducing it. And so you want to create context around what you want, why you want it when you're saying it.
So let's say I've identified that I want this information from a client so I can move forward on my next step. What would be some ways that you could move forward? I know often we talk about like the building of the trust, or that really tying back into the vulnerability trust. Can you kind of talk about how you could be vulnerable or align with them to get more of what you're looking for?
Well, yeah, I think that the big thing that people really have to do, they have to be able to understand what emotions is being triggered in ourselves and understand your own emotional triggers, because a lot of times if we're feeling like people aren't going to listen to us, or we're feeling like we don't have something to offer, we're feeling go ahead.
Well, I'll just be vulnerable.
Yeah, and the vulnerability doesn't mean I got to be vulnerable to Christine first. First, I have to be vulnerable to myself. I have to be able to identify the emotion that I'm experiencing and be honest about that. And a lot of people are like, emotions have no place in the workplace. They have no place they're going to get in the way. We got to cut off our emotions and just be logical about things. But we have to be vulnerable and we have to identify our emotions. Otherwise, they're going to guide a conversation whether we like it or not.
Is that number 4?
I don't think so. I think it's a 3.
I think
it might be number 1. It's got a number.
It goes somewhere. I wrote that. Be vulnerable. Yeah. What's number 3?
3, 4,
3,
2,
4.
1. I think that being vulnerable is one of the first things we have to be. I like it as a number 1. But that's kind of my thing, is emotion and vulnerability is the number 1 thing we have to be. And we want to be vulnerable to other people. We want to open ourselves and share ourselves with other people, but we have to be able to do that with ourselves first. And so I really believe that that's a number 1 thing. And then knowing what we want and why we want it is a number 2. Because we won't know.
So are we going to scrap this whole thing?
There's no scrapping. We're live.
I know. I think what be vulnerable is number 1, because the biggest thing that I've learned from you and experience when I practice what I know is the number 1 thing to do is the idea of moving myself from emotional state, from whether I'm being like super like just walk all over me, passive, no radical candor, to the world is happening to me, to, okay, well, I'm just going to throw stuff and throw words out that don't move me forward. And that might be like the beginning when Terry said, just go punch them. Maybe that's that piece. But the whole idea of identify where I'm at, what I want out of it, and to move myself into that more balanced, intentional step. That's why you're saying being vulnerable is number one.
Yeah. Yeah. And then we got to know what we want. And I also say that the vulnerability is number one, because a lot of times I think I know what I want, but until I get vulnerable, I can't be honest with myself. Because the ego gets in the way, and the outside world pressures get in the way, and listening to what everybody else says I should want,
or the past,
or the past,
results.
that really gets in the way a lot. And so we'll find out what we want when we become more vulnerable. And so vulnerability is the number one thing. And what we're really doing is we're attempting to face that lack of trust that we all have inherently that wants to keep us safe. And so really being vulnerable and stepping into the danger of the emotion and what we really want, and being honest about that, and then talking about what we want. And then I think the third thing is really taking action to make it known to the other people about what our perspective is, or what we're really looking for in the deal, what we're really looking for in the conversation. And when we can do that, we can get much further. And it comes from, and I talk a lot about place. Place is an acronym.
We'll save that one for another time. Sometimes we like to stack everything. So yeah, look for place.
We will. But I use that for the simple reason of when we can step into it with an attitude of place, and we'll talk about that another time, of course, we can really be more curious, and we can be more focused on being able to understand what the other person is looking for as we're being open and using more candor. And so
I do love place. We made a little slide deck of it, but just like a postcard to have on your desk. And now we're like totally teasing them.
Yeah. So to really bring this full circle, radical candor is about first being honest with yourself and being vulnerable about where you're at, what you like, what you don't like. And in conversations, a lot of times we put ourselves second and compromise where we're at, or because we've compromised and done that so many times, then we lash out, and we don't want to do that. And so the easiest way to keep from being either the victim of a conversation or victimized in the conversation is to be honest with yourself about what you're really looking for.
That intentional piece.
And being intentional, and then stating what you're wanting, what you're thinking. And that's the knowing what you want, and then taking action to put it out there.
Mm-hmm. So I'm going to write something for our audience.
Okay.
Any else you want to say about that particular client?
I think she's awesome in the fact that, and what we really look for in our clients is people who, one, want to perform better and want to have better businesses and want to actually delve into that personal development side of their business, and start understanding what's getting in the way of them being the high performer, what they're looking for, and how to get there. And then those people who we like to work with, we see them take a lot of action. They don't just talk about it, but they put it into practice. And then they come back and say, you know what, radical candor. And we get a text like, 15, 20 minutes after we had a conversation about it, they're using it. And so that's what we really like. We like the idea of high performers. We like to help people be the high performers, and really understand that it comes from a place of being vulnerable and saying, I want more out of my life. I want more out of my relationships. I want more out of my business relationships.
And I think the amount of value you add, or we add, I got to include myself, to having those conversations is huge. Of getting more of what you want, whether you're helping with your managers or your clients or your team, or even your partners. It's really about how to present yourself, knowing what you want, and also respecting where they're coming from. So
absolutely.
We're here to help you generate the business and life you desire. And we ask you the question, where do you want to be?
Absolutely.
I saw a post today. It was like 6 months are going to happen. Do you want to be thinking about where you could be, or do you want to actually be where you're thinking about being?
Absolutely. So that's what we got for you today. And we'll be talking to you very soon.